All right. Agree? We are actually on the air, but I'm going to give us a few more minutes and see if some people show up. So if that's okay with everyone.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It is 5:35, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Palm Springs City Council, Palm Springs Public Library Building Subcommittee. And if you all don't mind, let's just kind of go around the room. I know that we have some people who have excused absence, but just once again, let's introduce ourselves because we have someone new who's joined us. So my name is Ed McBride. I am the chair of the committee as well as president of the library trustees.
I'm Tony Garvey. I'm a consultant with Library Strategies.
I'm Sue Hall, and I'm also a consultant with Library Strategies.
I'm Jeannie Kays, Library Director.
Hi, I'm Mike Sweezy. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services for the Palm Springs School District.
Hi, I'm Juanita Garner, and I'm a community member.
Hi, Naomi Soto, Measure J Commissioner.
Hi, Maria Song, Planning Commissioner.
Marcus Fuller, City of Palm Springs.
Tracy Conrad, I'm president of the Palm Springs Historical Society, and I'm a founding member of the Palm Springs Library Foundation.
Very good. I just had a note here. Most of you who are on city boards or commissions, you know that the city follows Rosenberg's Rules of Order. I wanted to just highlight that because at the Board of Trustee meetings, there's just 5 of us, so we very seldom have to have someone say, follow that. But we might have some lively discussions here, so I just wanted to remind everyone that as chair, should I need to pull them out, I will. But I love lively conversation, but I just wanted to remind everyone that's what we're following in case it should ever come up. And as you guys may recall, the last meeting, we covered so much, and so I tried to capture from my notes, and I think, Sue, you shared your notes with me for the minutes. So was there any questions or comments? Did I misrepresent anything on the minutes? Did you guys have any questions about them?
I'll move approval of the minutes of August 13th.
Thank you.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Just one note too, remember we agreed that the filming and the website would serve as our minutes going forward. So if we have questions, we'll go there and consult that from this point forward. So we don't have to have anyone taking minutes. So we have all our attention on the meeting. So I would like to welcome you to our meeting. We're so glad you're here. Like I said, I hope I didn't scare you away with the homework assignments. Everyone else, again, I hope I didn't scare you with the homework assignments, but you were part of it. You said this is what we'd like to see to prepare for these meetings. And I think as we go through, just so you know, we will refer to some of those documents as we go to certain topics. And if we need more information from them, of course, we have the city to ask for that information, as well as staff. So, it's all about if you feel you don't have what you need in front of you, it's ask, and we'll try to get that information for you, especially as we start going through decision-making and coming up with our decisions about what we want to recommend. So I just want to make sure that's really clear that there's lots of information out there. If we need it, we will go get it for you. And then finally, I'd like to open up to see if we have any public comment. You can either join us at the table or I can give you a microphone, whichever you prefer. Well, why don't you join us at the table then, please? And we'll turn the microphone on for you.
Good evening, Chairman, committee members, Marcus. My name is John Pavelak. I'm here with my wife, Chris Pavelak here. We have a home there at Mountain Gate, but I'm also with Watermark Homes here. And what I wanted to do is leave the committee. I wanted to see if the committee had thought about having possibly the library in the on the entrance of the city in the north end off of Indian Canyon and Sunrise. We're working on a project there, so I thought maybe it was something that maybe the committee might want to consider as a site because it is it would be available there. Absolutely. And so I've left some maps and so forth in here where you'd have the location. It's also right adjacent to the CV link and so forth that's going through there. So, but just wanted to bring it up and have it for your consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
What was the link, I'm sorry, that you referenced?
Adjacent to the CV link that's going through there. Uh-huh.
The Fettuccine on Sunrise?
No, it'd be at Indian Canyon and Sunrise Parkway. And then we've got the new Whitewater Park that's going down the street there, and so it's kind of the entrance to the city on that. And it's probably, in between both communities, probably maybe $1 billion worth of activity that's gonna happen up at that end. So I thought maybe, at least inform the committee, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I'd like to close the public comment for now. As you guys recall, this meeting really was to kind of lay the foundation for us to have input into the criteria and to look at the work plan that will govern us through this process. Really, this is going to be the Sue and Tony show for a little while because they're going to take us through what they've created. And it's all about you guys giving them guidance and feedback. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You have one?
So what you're receiving right now is a draft work plan, and when I made my last iteration of it, I unintentionally took the watermark out, so off of it. But we had quite a bit of discussion at the end of the meeting last time that this was going to be a very compressed process. You have to present a recommendation or recommendations to the city on October 16th. And so there's quite a bit of data to look at and questions to ask and answer between then and now. So we sat down and basically proposed a work process that would have you meeting almost every Monday between now and October 16th. And tonight is, as Ed said, to sort of look at the foundation of the process. We're not going to get deep into the weeds tonight, but we're going to give you some very basic information on both the sites, and we're going to be looking at what your criteria is for evaluating a site. We have some basic criteria that we're going to present, and then we're going to ask you if you'd like to suggest some of your own. We're going to be doing that. We are going to be reviewing the basic information on the sites. We're going to look at what do we want to get done for the next meeting. The next meeting, we're going to get a little deeper into this, and we want to know what you want to know. What's going to help you make a decision? How much do you want to focus on any one aspect or another? Because this is going to be your decision, so you're going to have to tell us what do you need to know. We have some things that we'll be presenting next time, but I think it's more important to know what it is that you think will be helpful to you. And so one of the other questions that may or may not be addressed tonight is whether or not there are going to be any other sites considered. So given there's one that's just come up and there's another one that's been referenced. Then at the next meeting, what we would be doing is we would be between now and this next meeting on the 9th, which I think is actually 2 weeks away, is we're going to be digging in deeper into the sites that we've got on the table and finding out what kinds of things might you not know at this point that we can find out for you, and what kinds of things you want to know that we may not have thought about. And then we'll be bringing that back to you. Once you've heard that, you may want to know a little bit more, and we'll go digging for that. So essentially what's happening is we're sort of doing things up at this level, and then we're going to be drilling down on the group of options as a whole. And then those next 3 meetings, we're going to be looking at each of the 3 options that we've identified now. The current library site, Lot G downtown, and the College of the Desert. And then if there's a 4th site or a 5th site that's come up, we'll be giving you more information on that so that you can get really steeped in this for your decision making. We're also going to be encouraging you when we talk about this criteria later tonight. If you haven't already visited these sites, we really encourage you to go out and do that with this criteria in mind. So you can have an idea of, do these 3 sites all meet basic criteria, or are some of them sorely lacking, and that criteria really as important as it should be? So that's where you're going to be doing your own sort of if not fact-finding, sort of reconnaissance, that you can bring your own impressions back to the full group. And then we're going to be doing a session of just deliberation. We're going to be talking about what you've learned, what you think is important, what you think, maybe isn't as important. And one of the things we're going to keep coming back to you and saying, probably to the point where we're not very popular, is this is about real estate. It's not about what the building is going to look like. It's not about what's going to happen in the building. It's not going to be about the program. It's going to be about a site. What's the best site or the most attractive site? We're not even going to talk about money. How much more might it cost to build a library building on Lot G versus the current site? And I have no idea about that kind of thing. Now, it may be like any other thing where you have a certain amount of knowledge. That may be in your head, and you may be factoring it in, but it's not, am I correct, going to be the basis on where you're going to be making your decision. There are going to be aspects of the land, purely the land, that are going to make you lean one way more than the other because of possible expense for building on one site versus another. But the cost is not going to be the driving factor, as I understand that. So that October 7th meeting is going to be really critical for everyone to be here, because that's where you're going to be making, where you're really going to be chewing what you've learned and analyzing it from all perspectives, making your own cases, and hopefully reaching a consensus on what you want to recommend to the city. Tony and I had a phone meeting with Jeannie and Dr. Reddy, and Marcus, I think you were there. And one of the questions that we asked the city is, do you want just one recommendation, or would you like rank-ordered recommendations? Would you like, here's what we really love, but here's Plan B if that doesn't work, which will save you having to come back to the table again, or the city having to make a decision on their own. So what they said is they would very much like either a ranked-ordered or a Plan B. Which, I think probably makes the most sense, and I think, Tony, we agreed as well. So following that deliberation, Ed and Jeannie, as my understand, are going to go back and write a report with the recommendations in it and the case for supporting one option over another and where the second one might come in and the third. And then they will be presenting that to the committee for review to make sure they've reflected what your own thinking was. And they're going to be asking you to turn around your remarks very quickly. It gets very compressed at the end with a lot of the meaty work being done by just a couple of people. And then the final draft will be sent to the city on October 14th, and then it'll be presented to the city council on the 16th. Ed, I believe you have said that it's probably your understanding, and Marcus, you may want to jump in here, that the city council probably will not say, okay, that's great, we're going with A, B, or C on the spot.
I wouldn't expect that at
Yeah.
that meeting. I think they will take the report under, no, as a matter of fact, if you guys recall, they said they may have an option to come back and meet with us to review that report with us. So they may squeeze a session with us, and then they would take that up for, I guess, discussion and possible vote. Would that be what they would probably do, Marcus? For this kind of decision, I would imagine.
Oh, Ed,
Yeah.
I have an update. I believe city council's canceled on October 16th. Does that sound right? And now it's the 23rd?
Well, they give us a week.
Well, it doesn't give us a week because we still have to do the report and have it done. But it gives maybe them a week to review it before council. Because we have to finish it by the 10th, by, that week of the 7th.
Okay.
Have to finish it.
Okay.
Our report, that is.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that because that's a little different.
Yeah, it is,
Timeline.
yeah.
Well, and things can happen between now and then too as well, so, but I think that we know in October, we'll need to present a report to city council on what our decision was, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, through all this process, public will be at every meeting, so the public will have feedback on our discussions as well. I'm sorry, do you have?
No,
It's October 23rd.
yeah.
So are there any questions or concerns about the work plan? Okay, I'll go ahead and change this final date on it then, and we'll resend it to you.
Yeah.
Well, I do have one.
Yeah.
If the
City council's on the 23rd. Don't you have the final draft then could be on the 21st?
Not, no. No.
We were
because
really
have-
crunching it to get,
Yeah. I'm actually going to be out of town the week of the 14th and the 21st.
Got it. Okay.
However, any staff reports that go to city council have to be in well in advance so that they can become part of their packet. So it wouldn't really matter on the timeline.
Okay.
We have to have it in. But we can do it.
And I would say that if we end up considering more than 3 options, that could also impact this. So let's keep a caveat there. So, and I'm sorry I'm going to own your lives for the next Monday night, so I hope you're not,
Monday Night Football watchers.
Monday Night Football or whatever show comes on Monday nights, but, yeah. All right. So I think this is a great start. I think that we agree that this could be fluid in some instances as we uncover things, and we may find that once we nail the criteria down, some of this might change a little bit, but at least it is a foundation for us to get started. Is there any feedback to Sue or to Tony that you guys think that they're missing or you'd like to see inserted here, or?
In terms of criteria or the work plan?
The work plan. Okay? So this will be our guide now for a while. Okay?
So with that said, since we last met with you, what Tony and I have been doing, and with Ed's participation in some of it, is going and doing phone interviews with the individuals that represented the 3 options. Tony has had some extensive conversations with Jeannie about the current site. Tony,
Marcus.
pardon?
With Marcus.
Right, and with Marcus, and we've had some conversations with the city with Marcus and David, and Marcus provided a lot of additional outside information on Lot G, and then Ed and I had a conversation with the president and a trustee, correct? From from College of the Desert. So that's where we've gotten our basic information. It's very basic. And the reason it's very basic is because it was our assumption, not meaning to be insulting at all, but that many of you may not know the dimensions and anything about environmental issues or whatever with any of these sites. So we're just starting to give you that first level of information here, and we got it sort of from the sources themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to actually walk you through this.
Okay, and we're going to flip the agenda just a little bit and talk about the sites first, some basic information, and then talk about the criteria. So let's start with the current site. The current site, there are a variety of options on the current site. You could renovate the existing facility, which is about 34,000 square feet, and you have a 34,000 square foot library. You could renovate the existing facility and expand it on that current site and make it a larger library. You could replace the existing building with a new facility on that site. The city owns that site. Also, you could repurpose the existing facility and build a new library on that site. The site will accommodate any of those options. Now, there may not be an interest as we noted here, in replacing the existing building, but purely looking at it from an outside point of view and looking at the options on those sites, from my point of view, that's an option on this site.
And feel free to go ahead and stop us.
Yes, please, at any time.
Actually, before, we got to that.
Sure.
So when you say repurpose existing facility and build new
Right.
facility on current site, you're thinking like adjacent or,
Yes.
right?
Yes, and I'll have an aerial view in a couple slides so that you can see, but it is a large site and it would accommodate that.
So may I make a comment about, I warned the consultants, knowing our community, that the idea of tearing down that existing building, we probably would be drawn and quartered out in front of City Hall. But we asked them to apply what is common around the country when libraries are looking at these kinds of options. So I think it was only fair to raise that question, to say, is this a possibility? So as you can see, it's highly unlikely the city would approve such a thing, but at the same time, it was a question that had to be asked for us to discuss. So I don't want anyone running out here saying, oh my God, they're tearing down the building, because we're not. But at the same time, it was a question that was worthy of asking.
Sure. And one of the things that I typically work with a community on, a city or a county, when you're looking at an existing site is, because I look at it from the cost effectiveness of it. And in some cases, it's just generally more cost effective to start over than to renovate when a building has a lot of issues. So I brought it up. This site borders Baristo Road and Sunrise Way. As I said, the existing building is 34,000 square feet, and there are 127, and I indicated shared parking spaces. So they're not dedicated parking spaces. And from my experience, I was a library director for a long time and built a lot of libraries. From my experience, people take issue with two things when you build a library: parking and lighting are the biggest ones. And so you'll see that we'll talk about parking as we go through this process. Yes, there are structural issues. You'll hear more about those at the next meeting. Using the word some may be downplaying it a little bit, but there are some significant issues to be developed. But we don't know that there are any environmental issues. I don't think there's a buried oil tank in there that would contaminate the soil. But you never know. Looking at the current site, there's about 46,000 square feet to the north. That could be expansion possibility that would take you right out to that corner of Baristo and Sunrise. There's 100,000 square feet to the south, and that's if the existing parking is preserved. If you went to the south and maintained the current building and repurposed it or whatever, there's still about 80,000 square feet to build a new library with its own parking on that site. And a huge thanks, by the way, to Marcus for providing us with a lot of information and these aerial views. So there's the library, and there's the space to the north that we talked about. And there's a space to the south. You can see it's butting right up against the existing library. But if you were to repurpose that and build a new library, you still have this big chunk of space that's there. So that's the existing site. Are there any questions about the existing site? Okay. Yeah.
Marcus, is there any issue on, maybe I'm getting to the weeds, but cutting a driveway on Sunrise?
No.
Okay.
It was my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a plan at one time that actually would connect that entrance to the Girls Club over to the library. That roundabout right there, we saw a plan, right, that had a driveway connecting that and parking.
The 2005 proposal had the parking lot connected to the Boys and Girls Club driveway, which is that stoplight there now. And then the 2012 plan added some parking and then did a right turn in, right turn out on Sunrise in between the two stoplights.
Not the weeds at all.
Okay, let's talk about Lot G, a second option. This is near Bellardo Road, Museum Way, and Andreas. The site dimensions it's 102 feet by 183 feet. That's about, because it's a little bit longer on one side than the other, a little bit longer going in the other direction, one side than the other, but about. It's about half an acre, which is between 18 and 19,000 square feet. We don't know if there are environmental issues. There's a parking garage under it, so I'm assuming that people have already studied the soil there, so we'll assume that right now that there are no known environmental issues on that site.
Tony, we were going to ask Marcus, I think, does the city now own the parking lot, the adjacent parking lot to Lot G as well?
Yes, so
Okay.
we have we own the airspace underneath Lot G and the lot for the parking structure next door.
Okay, and the airspace over lot.
Yes.
Okay.
But I think you have to very carefully think about the parking counts because that's very much spoken for in a multitude of
Right.
ways. Marcus?
Right. And that is one of the things that we discussed as well, as I said, parking and lighting.
You do?
Okay, so we looked at Lot G, and certainly you could construct over that adjacent parking structure. So you would go in on the ground level of Lot G, and then it could be a multi-story building that would go over Lot G. Going over Lot G, that's about 50,000 square feet in that space
what
over
height?
Lot G.
At what height?
I mean, how high could the building go?
Well, you're saying 50,000 square feet at multiple levels. How high? How many stories?
It depends on what the library wants to build
you
as
get-
far as what size library it wants to build, but certainly going over, even if you went one floor over that lot and then used the front lot, you would have a significant sized library. And I'm assuming you want to look at a library somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 square feet, looking at what your population projections are. I looked out to 2040. What I saw for 2040 was somewhere between 56 and 60,000 people. In the different numbers that I saw, there were a couple of different numbers, looking at, albeit generous, a library site at a square foot per capita, that'd be about 60,000 square feet. That depends on what you want to do in that library space.
So I just wanted to clarify, Tony, you're talking about Lot G and then building up and then going over the parking structure, the parking deck.
Not
So it
straight.
wasn't,
So I'm talking
Yeah,
about
it would-
square footage of the actual building. How tall do you have to be to get 60,000 feet unless you go horizontal over that? That's what I was asking.
yeah, or it would be horizontal
That's
over
what I was
that.
Yes,
asking.
because
So-
there's 18,000
3
plus
stories.
square feet on the site
I
itself.
gotcha.
So,
18,000.
3 stories,
You'd have to
So-
go 3 or 4 stories.
3 or 4
4.
stories.
Yeah.
And I think there's a limit of 6.
You can go up to 60 feet. Well,
Okay.
That's a
Or
whole
whatever
another
the
can
s-
of worms too, whatever
Yeah.
the city says you can do, but just trying to understand what it
Civic plan
takes.
currently is 60 feet.
Exactly, exactly. So, so
Good.
there are options. You can have a multi-story building on Lot G. You could extend and go up, have the entrance on Lot G and go over the existing parking structure. Another thing I asked about when talking with David Reddy and talking with Marcus, when Sue and I had that conversation, was what about adding to that parking structure, or what about dedicated library space in that parking structure? So if you had however many floors that were dedicated to library parking, and that's something we'll talk more about before the next meeting, so I can have a better idea on that. But certainly, we were told that we could investigate the possibility of adding another level to the parking structure. It would take more than one level to accommodate just library-specific parking. It will require some structural retrofit of the underground garage to support the weight of a building. Libraries are heavy buildings. This has been done before. I don't have a cost for it, but it has been done before, and it did not sound like it was an exorbitant amount of money to do that from what we
Yeah, so
found.
Grit did the same thing for West Elm. So they
Right.
had to build over the existing parking, and it didn't take much to retrofit the columns and what have you to support that building. So I was surprised to find out. And they were planning to do the same thing on this lot with their own retail residential building.
Right.
And so they didn't find that there was going to be a huge expense to do that retrofit.
So, and I'm sorry, I haven't been over there into the parking deck. I've always parked on the other side of that. I imagine that Lot G, ground, and we're saying
There it is, right
directly
there.
underneath is parking, correct? How many levels?
One.
Just one.
One?
But
Just
most
one?
of Lot G is on grade.
I don't think it is.
I think part of the reason it was attractive is because it's on grade, when we were looking at it for other.
explain what that means.
It's on the ground, it's not on the parking structure. But I know some of it is, but, I mean, I defer to you.
Okay.
But I think part of the reason it was attractive is because some of it is on grade.
Because that parking lot at one time, you could enter, and
can
go all
still-
the way over to the Hyatt, right? The Hyatt connects to it, so I'm assuming there's something under there to get you over to the Hyatt and to the other parking
But
deck,
it
right?
doesn't go the whole extent of that,
Oh, that lot, okay,
Yeah, part of it is, but.
yeah.
okay,
Right.
makes sense.
Right, and so clearly there are questions that we have about parking that we hope to be able to answer before you meet again in 2 weeks. But clearly also there are some possibilities in terms of parking. So that definitely would be an issue. And this is the site, and you see the parking adjacent to it. And then that would be, to the bottom of that would be City Park that is being constructed there. College of the Desert, we have the least amount of information on. Ed and Sue had a conversation with the folks that Sue mentioned from the College of the Desert. They have expressed interest in partnering with the city. Right now, it's with the city to continue those conversations with College of the Desert. But I really don't have information on, well, we know where the site is, we don't know where on that site, for example, a library might be. We don't know, while we assume it would be the number of square feet the city needs, we don't have any numbers on that. So I don't have any numbers to share with you on this particular option.
So in our conversation, the College of the Desert, at this particular point, would like to have more conversation with the city about programming and how and you guys have seen some of the articles we've sent. So it's really important that an academic public library come together and agree on how they're going to serve both these communities, right? So I shared with them, we are not charged with programs at this point, and so I've referred it back over to the city council to have another follow-up conversation. I have no idea if that means it's a commitment on we're going to do something or have conversations, but at this point, there's continued conversations on that. So it's still on our list, it's still coming back to us, but it wasn't at a point to where we could actually give you the detailed information on the other sites. So, fair enough on that, Sue? I mean, you were part of that? Yeah.
And clearly, parking will be something we have questions about as well. I have done this. I've built a joint public community college library before, and parking was one of the biggest issues to deal with, both pre-construction and post-construction in this kind of endeavor. It's a challenge. Yes.
Has any one of you seen the plan from COD?
There is no plan. We keep asking. They have some conceptual thing.
Right, so that's what I understand as well. So there's not sharing of information to even see at least even what corner we could possibly be.
So in our conversation with them, what we did learn is there are 2 phases to their building program. They are working on, with consultants, as a matter of fact, on phase 1. So they really aren't quite ready to say this is our plan. But, they're looking at a boutique hotel, a restaurant, lots of things that are going on to that piece of property. So they really weren't ready to say, okay, a library could go here. They're still working out some of their programs and where they would be on that lot. But I felt it was a really useful conversation because at least I had an inkling of what they're planning in phase 1, phase 2. But as they told us, that could change. And the consultants they've hired are actually national consultants who have built inner city campuses of this type. So I think that they're looking for some advice on that as well. So does that answer your question? I don't know if I did or not, but it's all they have at this point.
I think we could also add that when the initial library foundation was formed, COD was very much part of that conversation. And the concept was that it would go on the hard corner of Barristo and Farrell. Now, that might not stay the case, but there was thought to be a nice synergy. Not everybody agreed, but there is nice synergy between the high school across the street and COD there, and then the cultural center, otherwise known as the Camelot, right there. So I guess think that if we had some huge preference for where it wanted to go, I'm sure we could voice that, or the city could voice that. But the synergy with all of those new homes there, the homes that are to the west, I mean, there's a lot of there was a lot of reasons why the Library Foundation was initially looking at that spot.
You know, I'd like to add a little bit to what Ed was talking about in terms of what their vision for this site is. The reason they're going to build a boutique hotel and look at restaurants and things like that is they have an intention of developing programming around that kind of thing. Hospitality, culinary, arts, workforce development. So they even mentioned that they were thinking about building a branch campus that was sort of like a regional workforce development center.
Their exact words.
So, and then working out with the library how the library and what it does might fit into that vision.
And we put library of the future because they did mention, and I think this is an important fact, as they're building a campus, as we all know, campuses are not what I used to go to. So it's important for them to embrace technology because they will have a technology program on this campus. And so they were talking about things, you know, how students will access information and how they will use a facility. So I wanted to make sure that we captured Library of the Future as an important part of what, you know, they want to see happen there. So that's right off of their conversation with us. Any questions about that?
Okay, so that's the basic information that we have now about these three sites. Any questions about any of that before we go on to criteria? If not, we'll move forward. If something occurs to you, just jump back and say so. So let's look at some criteria. Well, and let me tell you where some of this came from. There are no recommended criteria from national library organizations. There are no standards. Really, as a profession, they have moved away from that. So there's not something I could go to the American Library Association or the Public Library Association and say, you know, so what are those site criteria that you think we should all be using? It's really become much more of a local issue. And so I did look at site criteria I have used before as a library director in building buildings. I did a lot of research, and I had already in my work collected these from other library systems around the country. If I found some that I thought were interesting to use in particular situations, I had gathered those from other places. So this is kind of an amalgamation of all those things that I found other places, things I've used myself that I thought, you know, would be pertinent to any site that you're evaluating wherever you are. At the end of this list, then we'll talk about, are there things that are Palm Springs specific that we need to add to this list to help us as you look at these sites. So some of these are very basic, you know. You can see the library from a lot of different directions on a particular site. That's an important thing. You want the library to be highly visible when someone's driving past. And that's harder than it sounds, because if you're driving past at 40 or 45 miles an hour, is that library going to be visible? We want to make sure the site is on or it's immediately adjacent to frequently traveled streets. You want people to happen upon the library, not necessarily only find it if they're seeking it out somewhere and have to have, you know, their Google Maps on to find the library. You want them to find it when they're going to the grocery store, or they're going to a school, or they're going to pick up their dry cleaning. You want to make sure it's easy to get into and get out of the parking lot onto the main thoroughfares that are around the library. These are the things that people will be unhappy about, and City Hall will get a lot of calls about if a library opens and they find it really difficult to get in and out of the site. You want to see if you can get controlled left turns onto a major high-traffic street. That's the issue for a lot of places. You know, when, oh, I can only turn right coming out of this library parking lot. Oh, well, then how do I get to that other direction? You want to be able to look at things like this. And let me just insert at this point, it's highly unlikely that you find a site that has all of these criteria. You're going to have to decide which criteria are the most important to you. I would like to say I've built libraries on sites that I think are not ideal. And you know, did they work out fine? Yeah, but they have their challenges. And you have to work around those challenges afterwards. So you want to get as many of these criteria as you can. If it's important to you, is it on a public transit route? Is the library within safe or easy walking distance of a transit stop? Think, mom coming with a couple of kids and a bag full of library books. How easy is it for them to get off a bus and walk to the library? If someone is walking or riding a bike, is there safe access into the library for those folks? Is the location accessible to everybody? And that might mean physically accessible. Can people get to it a variety of different ways? And that's a big challenge in some places more than others. I think of Phoenix where I live, and mass transit is not really very well developed in most areas of Phoenix. And so some places are not as accessible. They're accessible by car. That's it. But here you have a little bit different situation. So how accessible is it to people who live throughout this city? And also, is it psychologically accessible? Are people going to feel comfortable going there? Is there mixed-use development in the surrounding area? It's nice to have a variety of uses around that library. People think, oh, it's great to be right by residential, but library uses is a habit. You also want people have other retail uses or other commercial uses around it, because that's what people tend to do. Oh, I'm going to stop and do this and this, pick up my prescription, and oh yeah, I'm going to stop at the library. And so we try to look for that. Are there adjacent uses that complement the library in terms of function or peak use times or things like that? Is there going to be a church next door? Sometimes that works out great if you can use, their parking lot, and if mostly they're busy Sunday morning, maybe some Saturday night, depending on, what type of house of worship this is. But that can be a really, great in terms of a complementary use that's nearby. A park that's nearby where families might be coming to, oh, we're going to come to the library, great, and then I can go out in the park with my kids and have lunch, or let them blow off a little steam that they couldn't blow off in the library. Is the lot large enough to accommodate outdoor library uses? Now, Sue's from Minneapolis. That's not as big an issue in Minneapolis as it certainly was in Phoenix, where I'm from. We had patios in all our libraries. Nice climate. You have a similar climate. If building expansion is an issue, is there enough space for that? And of course, ample parking. People drive up and return materials without getting out of their car or getting out of it a minimal amount of space. People like to do that, especially in a climate like yours when it's 110 degrees. Is there potential for solar energy? Again, not an issue in all locations, but it might be one here. Is that something that you're interested in? Are there co-locations with complementary government entities or other entities? A park, I've built libraries next to parks, I've built libraries next to fire stations, police stations, which if you're in an area where crime is an issue, a co-location with the police department is a great thing. That may not be an issue here. But there are complementary uses of having something next to it. I would love to be next to, social service agency and work on workforce literacy together, for example. Joint use library, are there joint use library facility opportunities between the library and, sorry, I left out a word, college, community college libraries? In both of these instances, talking about co-location or joint use, it's really important to make sure that you've met those other criteria first. Co-location might look great, but if you can't get the parking you need, then that site is not going to work for you. If you're looking at a library that's going to be buried in the middle of another development and not visible unless you're right in the middle of the development, well, then maybe that's not a good site. The development itself might be wonderful, but it hasn't met these other site criteria. So I caution you that you want to look at those site criteria first. And is there potential for partnerships with other educational or cultural organizations? We heard a little bit about that with the College of the Desert site. You have a tendency to partner more with your neighbors. They're right there. And so looking at it from that point of view, Lot G is very different than the current site, for example. But again, you decide how important that is to you. Now, those are the criteria that are kind of generic criteria I could go anywhere in the country and use in terms of looking at library sites. Are there any questions about those criteria, or do you think there are any kind of generic ones that are missing before we go to Palm Springs specific ones? No? Yeah,
More of a question around the parking.
sure.
So, and I recognize that, libraries bring all sorts of community members, and so parking's very important. But is the assumption that, a lot of studies look at people's relationship with vehicles is going to be changing in the next, especially the next 10, 20 years. And so just want to make sure that we're kind of keeping that in mind, that the parking needs that of right now might be very drastically different in about 20 years. And so if, I don't know how we're thinking of how flexible the parking space is, or how set it is, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and certainly we will want to check in with the city about, are there, and I'm sure there are, what are the transit plans looking 20 years in the future in terms of mass transit? Are there lines that we don't know anything about that you might be going in somewhere? Are there, we just put in light rail in Phoenix not too long ago. We're kind of late to that game. But that became a very important part of our consideration moving forward in that regard, and changed dramatically what we started considering for a lot of places when we saw what that did to the foot traffic in some places.
I think another way to look at it too is because the future is so unknown in terms of those kinds of questions. If you have ample parking now, you can always repurpose that parking space, as opposed to we wished we'd built a bigger parking lot and now there's no way to extend it, that kind of thing. So, but it's a really good question, but it's such an unknown for most
Right, and I
cities
guess that's
right
what I'm
now.
saying, that making sure that we have the parking that we need, but that it can change, right? And it's
Right.
not such a stagnant design.
Exactly. And you could be actually looking at saying the same thing about libraries themselves, because people always say, well, what is the library going to look like in 10 years or 20 years? Well, I don't know. This is my career, and I can't tell you what it's going to look like. And so my recommendation always is that you build the most flexible building that you can build, so that you have power anywhere you need it, and you can change the function of any space in that library, because we really don't know for sure. I think it's pretty easy for me to say, no, all the books aren't going to be gone in 10 years. Not going to happen. But beyond that, there's a lot we don't know. Anything else?
Yeah, can you talk just a little bit more about the 60,000 square foot number that you used earlier?
Sure. And just like parking, there are no national standards for space. So every time, I work somewhere, it's a little bit different. Some library systems have developed their own standard for what their goal is, and they're all over the place. Some are, a third of a square foot per capita. You've already got close to a square foot per capita. You certainly have enjoyed that. It would be really hard for you to say, but now we're going to build a new building and we're going to make it half a square foot per capita, because you already have a certain expectation for this library. I've also heard, in some of the discussions, people are interested in performance space, for example. There's a very robust programming portion of what this library does. They bring in a lot of people. That changes what size building you're looking at, but there is no national standard. When I work with different libraries, a common goal that I hear is a square foot per capita. Not everyone can get there, but when you look at where you are right now, I think it would be a reasonable goal for you to have.
Thank you.
Sure. It sure would be a lot easier if we still had those standards, but we don't. And they caused a lot of angst when we had them. But so this really does work out better. It just means you have to make more decisions locally.
But on that 60,000 that you're saying per capita, does it normally include a performance space?
Well, that's just it. You don't know. It includes whatever is important for that particular library system. It could be that they have, a big maker space. They have a big STEM lab. They have a black box theater. Maybe they don't have any of those things. Maybe they have a big kitchen in it because they do a lot of cooking programs, and so there's a commercial kitchen in the thing. It could take a lot of different forms, and what's important to one community isn't what's important to another community. So it really does depend. What I encourage communities to do is to make sure whatever they go in with, they can change down the road. And so try to make those spaces, if they do have them, as flexible as possible. As few internal walls separating things as possible, so they can change it up.
And one of the things that is unique about Palm Springs is that you have so much arts and culture. You have a city that's pretty much defined by those aspects. So eventually, when you get into programming or even space and architecture, you're going to be looking at what's important to Palm Springs. You're not going to build the same kind of library that you might find in Scottsdale, Arizona, or St. Paul, Minnesota, because you're being defined somewhat by what's already going on in Palm Springs and by what's already available. I mean, do you have good performing space? Do you have auditoriums out there? Do you have community meeting rooms? So where is the need? Where is the community and cultural need that the library is going to be filling? And I don't want to get into programming, but it's that flexibility and responding to the community that's going to probably be a consideration.
Exactly.
It certainly feels like our current space, did you quote what we're currently at per capita in terms of that building now? Do we know?
Well, you're at 34,000 square feet, and your current population's what, 45? 42?
Okay.
Okay. So you're pretty close to square foot per capita.
Okay.
Maybe 0.75, maybe 0.8.
Okay. So in the space that we have now, we clearly know that looking to the future, we need more. I'm looking at our city librarian. If you had the space to do the things that we would like to do, right?
There's so much.
But there's also space that traditionally in that building was planned that we no longer do.
Right.
Which is a good example, I think, of where, the people who sat at this table or whatever table 40 years ago thought we've just got to have this space to do this. And now, look, we don't.
We have a huge research room, and it's a big empty room right now because it's a lot of things on.
That's where the flexibility comes in. But you're saying that a per capita and looking at potential growth for our city would be a great place to start as a target for these conversations. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and we have not clearly had this discussion. I'm just trying to bring up a number that you can find helpful while you're looking at these sites, and that based on what you already have, I think would be a reasonable place to look at. A lot also depends on how is that building designed, and we all see that in our homes. You can have a smaller place that seems bigger because it's designed in a much more open way. Right now, the library is constricted by these, by the shapes that they have and the way where the walls were put and things like that. It's not a big open box. Just like a new home is more like that without a lot of separate little rooms, libraries are more like that too, with big open spaces. And that makes them more flexible. Yeah.
And just for comparison, maybe this is a question for Jeannie. The other libraries in the valley, are we the biggest one, or how comparable, like, what are some of the other sizes roughly?
So Cathedral City Library is 20,000 square feet. The Palm Desert Library, the joint use facility is about 42,000 square feet. The Palm Desert side's 20, and COD is about 20, and then they have the middle common area. I don't remember. Rancho Mirage.
It's big.
I think it's 40 or 45.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And again, when you get to programming and working with an architect, one of the things that I've done that you may want this person to do is look at what's happening in the area. How does it compare to other places? And look at what we would call some peer libraries. What are those places doing? And where do you fall in that grouping? Because typically people ask the same questions you're asking right now. Oh, what happens in that place or in that place? We're more like them. So you find communities that are similar to yours in terms of how much money do they have to spend? What's the per capita income? Things like that. And then look at, all right, what are they doing with that in terms of their library?
So I have a concern that I think you might have misunderstood at the last meeting that I was trying to voice. It is almost impossible to conceive of, well, let me put it this way. If the city council's direction is that this wants to have a museum component and a display component, that changes your calculus about what site works better. If the city council is willing to entertain the idea of multiple sites, that is an interesting concept. Or if they want to drive this toward the tourist, or they want to drive this toward the citizen, the existing citizen. So it's very hard for us to consider a site in the vacuum of zero programming. So I would hope you go back to the city council and tell us, yes, we want a Starchitect designed library that's going to attract tourists. We want something that's for the community and that's going to service students and community members and locals that tourists will find, but they won't necessarily stumble upon. It makes a huge difference on these sites. And if we're going to consider other sites, I think we need some more direction unless you want us to make it up and tell the council, which always goes really well in this town.
So, and by the way, Tracy, I thought your comment was spot on. I know it's kind of hard to think of this, but I think that in the Palm Springs specific criteria, you just made a couple of comments that maybe we should talk about here as being Palm Springs specific criteria.
Well, and I agree. Those should be, if
Yes.
we're
I
going to
agree.
generate it, or if the council's going to tell us from on high what it is that we're driving for.
Well, it would be my assumption, I know we shouldn't assume this, that in our report to city council, we would say, we use this criteria, and they would have the option to say, that's not that important to us. So for example, I think you just hit on something for me. Maybe our criteria is that a location that is both accessible to our tourist industry as well as our citizens would be ideal. Does that make sense? I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't put that out there as a criteria to measure some of the spots that we're looking at. Because we know, as a business owner, both of those are very important to me, and I think they'd be important to our library. Maybe, I'll look at you.
Yeah, definitely.
During season?
We want all the things, don't we?
During the season, do you find that you have a lot of people from all over the country who are here to live for 6 months coming in?
Today, I feel like a politician. In fact, today I had a family from Vancouver, BC, and they were returning all of their books, getting ready to go home, and the little boy, so sweet, about 8 years old, he says, "Dad, I need to say goodbye to the fish." And he ran through the library, and I was like, walk. But he ran to the fish pond, and he's like, fish, and whoosh, out the door he went. And it was so heartwarming. So we get the tourists. In the season, we're slammed with out of town or snowbirds. And then people say, "Oh, you must be really slow in the summer." In the summer, full of kids and families for summer reading. So we see it all, but we want it all too, So we want the archive, we want the social justice that was talked about before. We want the public art. We want the exhibit walls. We want to be everything to everyone in our community. So it's tough.
I think for me, if I may put out here one that I was hinting at, is that one criteria would be, our goal would be to accommodate 1 square foot per capita to keep that going for us. Now, I know that we're going to have a crystal ball to see what that's going to look like over the years, but if we say that's one of our criteria, at least when we're looking at these locations, we would know if it would meet the expansion that we would require. And then I think that you're next, but may I throw that one out there
Sure.
for discussion?
Well, I totally agree with you. I think that we've luxuriated in that much space, and we should continue to do so, at least aspirationally.
Yeah.
Do we also consider our out-of-towners as our population? Because as our neighborhoods swell with visitors,
Well, so I think we need at least that then, if not more.
do we consider them as?
Can I just say something? I feel like this should be focused on our community, our residents, our full-time residents. I feel that people that come from out of town who want to take their children to a library or want to go to a library will find the library. They're not going to be stopped. They're not going to go, oh, well, it's not downtown, so I'm not going. That family found it because they wanted to find it. And I feel like the community needs to be first. I'm not saying that we can't consider other things, but I feel like we have to be focused on our community and our residents.
Fair enough.
So that's a great criteria. I would add the criteria. Well, and it sounds like you want to have a criteria of how does this service the community be more important possibly than tourists. But your inclusive criteria of how do we service both of those disparate populations? And they're looking for different things. And you service them in different ways, which is why it's impossible to decide on a site unless you understand some things about programming. So, you know, the way you worded it, Ed, is very,
Which one?
it's kind. What you say.
You want it accessible to both tourists and the community.
But maybe with an emphasis on the community.
Absolutely, absolutely. That goes without saying as far as I'm concerned. I think that could we have the best of all worlds so that those who are visiting us will find us too. You know, there was, did we share the article about the library becoming a tourist destination in the communities? Why, I think that could happen for us depending upon what site we select. So I think that community is always the focus, but should we also consider those who are visiting with us or who are living here part-time? So when you say community, I'm curious. So if someone has a home here and they live here 6 months, are you including them in that group, or are you talking about those of us who live here year-round?
Well, I'm thinking about people who live here year-round.
Okay.
As I know that we do have a lot of snowbirds. We don't have a lot of families that come here for 6 months out of the year and then move and then go back to their homes. So I feel that the community is the people that live here. I love the idea, of including the tourists. I think it's great, but I feel like if we're too focused on that, we're kind of neglecting a lot of people that really rely on the library, really need it. And so that's just me.
I think most libraries would say that's their priority as well. Because there are a lot of cities that have attractive libraries. I've spent a lot of time in the Seattle Library, which is an iconic library. It's a place where when people come to Seattle, it's one of their top 5 places to visit. That's not why they did it that way, but it's certainly what it's turned into.
Well, I think of snowbirds as community members. I'm talking about the transient tourist population as being different. The hotel guest is different than someone who owns a home here and comes for 6 months when they decamp from colder climes. Because they have a similar need to people that live here full-time, except for possibly their children are grown, but they have grandchildren. And the tourist is a different demographic.
Right. Okay. Yes.
What Juanita's saying kind of really resonates with me. And I think keeping in mind what the library would, the pattern of development in the city. So I think we've been kind of looking at the library in a vacuum and what would this mean and what can we do? But downtown looks so beautiful and there's been so many great developments, but I think that would kind of is a reflection of kind of being this great, fun tourist city, right? And I think for me personally, I think of how great would it be to invest in something that is, community driven, family driven, and that is, I think that would go noticed, that it would feel different than some of the other changes we've seen. Great changes, but changes we've seen.
So maybe the Palm Springs specific criteria is different for tourists than it is for community members. I think that's what you're driving at, and we maybe should evaluate it, each site different, based on those 2 different criteria, not one joined criteria. There could be a site that's better for community members and a site that's better for tourists.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
So they need to be separated, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
I modified one of the criteria that you
Okay.
presented.
Okay.
So let me read what I'm hearing and see if everyone agrees. It's the one that says location accessibility up there. Location accessible to all populations served with an emphasis on year-round residents first, this isn't very pretty, but first, followed by part-time residents, followed by visitors, in that order. Because I think that's what I'm hearing, is that the year-round residents are the top priority, followed by those who are here part-time and own homes. They're residents as well.
It might be more egalitarian to just say, how does this site work for visitors? How does this site work for full-time community members, and how does it work for snowbirds?
So break this up.
And
Yeah.
just rate the sites, and you'll see, maybe there's a site that works for all. And you'll see them fall out that way, rather than having to,
I can break that into three criteria.
Something someone said made me think, I mean, is it important for us to take in consideration how our city is growing in what direction? You know, as we had public comment about the north side, we're seeing lots of activity on the north side of our city. Is it important for us to take that in consideration? I don't know. So, you know, I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing that out there. Should we weight that?
don't you think, yeah, maybe. And also, I think that after you do all the weighting of all of the sites, then that's when you get down to the nitty-gritty of how you choose, right? What, if you have a specific criteria that's most important to you, that will drive a certain site priority and a plan B apropos, right?
But I have two comments. One is that the physical limitation of each of the sites. If you're looking at the downtown, it's what you call half of an encatchment area because you have the mountains on the west. So everybody has to come to this one destination. Where if you're looking at the current library site, you have a 360-degree access. So I think that should be another category in which you're going to be looking at how accessible it is from all residents. The second thing, which I think is an off-a-wall question, is have you had experience where you may have two different doors to this library? And what I mean by that is that it could be that part of the function is 50 feet away, 20 feet away, a mile away. Have you had those kind of situations where maybe portions of the library speak to different groups of a city? And have that been successful?
I've had a couple of libraries that have more than one entry. Typically, it's not something we like to have a lot of because you have, if you have security systems, if your security system goes off, you can't have people, running great distances to go find that person. So it impacts how you staff a library to have more than one entrance or exit. But I've certainly had them, and it's based on the design of the building, it's worked out fine. It just you have to take into consideration how it's going to operate and where people are parking and how far they're coming from and things like that. But sure, you can have more than one. What you want to avoid is having them, for example, on different levels, unless you had, for example, if you had a level that was really just performance space, for example. It might have its own entry and exit, so it could be used after hours.
So I have a question for Marcus.
Yeah.
Marcus, and I realized that I wished I'd gone and done this research before today, but does the city have a vision statement for where the city would like to grow, how the city would like to, its buildings and its development? What does it want to look like?
You have an outdated general plan.
I was going to say, I went to the city's website, and I didn't find anything.
No. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, Marcus.
The general plan actually has some really nice language in it. It does.
But it's old.
Conceptual, it's always old, because every city's is old, right? It's never updated on time. It's really got some nice vision language, yeah.
Should we use that language and refer to it? I mean, is that something we should do?
Yes.
Okay.
Could we get a copy of that? Because I think that would really help to frame the discussion even more.
We can get that for you.
Thank you.
It's online.
It's online.
I didn't find anything that I would have pulled right out and said, yeah.
I have actually a question for the group, if I may.
Absolutely.
I hear about, what's happening to your downtown in terms of it being a cultural destination. Is that something that we should be using as Palm Springs-specific criteria? How important is it for the library to be part of this downtown cultural area?
That's a politically very fraught question.
Charged. But given right now, you've only got 3 options, that's going to have to be tackled.
See,
Well, I think it's going to be part of the calculus.
as president of the library trustees, I feel wherever the library is will become a cultural destination. If we do the program right, which we're not here to talk about program, but we could potentially go somewhere that we haven't even thought of and become a cultural destination, just like the museum is at one end of the city. That's conceivable, and what we put in that building could make it that, to be
Okay.
honest. So,
Okay, so it's not necessarily a consideration then that we need to attach to all of these sites.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, I think that's a good question, but from my perspective, wherever we go would be a cultural destination.
Well,
I
I
think
agree,
you
and I
are
feel
now.
like, that's what I was gonna say. I feel like in this era, we're very culturally drawn. We are a community space, community gathering space. In the 70s, it was all about research and come in and see an expert and do your reference searches. And now we still do some of that stuff, but a lot of it's available online through us. Right. So this, but today, looking through some of the old plans in 2005 when they were planning for a building, there were so many computers, and in 2005 it was all like, go sign in for the computer. And today we were busy and we had a lot of people using our computers, but we also had a lot of people just using the Wi-Fi and people who have their phones and tablets, and so there's not, that demand has swerved a little bit.
Right.
And we have these giant study tables. Now most people are single. They don't want to sit with anybody. They don't want to sit with other people. They want to sit by themselves. They're cocooned, and so we're doing things like providing streaming services and doing a lot of online resources. But yes, but we love the edutainment aspect where we're educational and entertaining at the same time.
I guess the question is, I think we're all in agreement that wherever the library is, it should have a cultural component, that it pulls people. I guess the question is whether it is kind of in conjunction with other cultural facilities downtown, or if it's like a standalone experience. But either way, yes.
How could we put that into criteria?
You're gonna do it when
I
you
like the way you
deliver
put
it.
it. Is it going to be seen as a standalone destination or part of a shared cultural or?
Shared experience. 'Cause
Yeah,
even the
shared
CID is
experience.
still shared experience.
And the current site's a shared experience in some ways.
Is that captured in the co-location with complementary? I mean, it says government entities, but
Yeah.
it could just be with city resources or,
You could refine that to include cultural.
So we have a question for you. What more do you want to know about each of these sites or about the group of sites? What will help you?
I want to
Feel
know if
comfortable.
the city's going to hand down the programs, or we're going to be allowed, is this going to, entail those other functions? Are we supposed to say, yes, a display space is really important, or yes, we can have multiple sites? You could end up saying that you want an Instagram-worthy looking thing, one place, because that's the most important thing, and that we want the community center elsewhere. The city, if we're left to our own devices, great, but but tell us one way or the other, or if they're going to drive it.
So I,
Because it sounds like they're going to drive it.
well, I think that, but wait a minute, I think that you hit on some, to me, I heard two different things. So let me back up. I think that if we said in our criteria that this would be an ideal site if it were a main library and the only library facility serving the community, or this would be a great site if it were one of multiple locations, looking to the future. Because we could say that this, if we, I'm throwing this out, if we stay where we are right now, we know we already have a semi-branch downtown, a block away from where we're talking about. I think that we're going to see our residents want a north branch potentially, or a south branch. So we could say that if we stay in our current location, it must be understood that we're looking to the future, we may need multiple sites.
And
That
isn't
could
it
be a
funny, we used to
criteria.
have multiple sites?
We did.
Yes, and,
Yeah.
it-
So we
you
had
know, the
three,
history of
yeah.
it is just, you know, infuriating.
But your program side of this, I think that.
Well, that's what I mean by programs.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about whether there's a black box theater or not. I'm talking about,
Okay.
is this multiple sites? Is it a display space? Is it a meeting center? Is it a library of the future? Is it a culinary center? That's the kind of programming I'm trying to understand.
I think that, you know, it's really, I love what you said about a site in the north end of Palm Springs. I think that, you know, my neighborhood, I bought my home, you know, over 20 years ago. In my neighborhood, where there were a lot of families, and my neighborhood has changed completely to where there's not a single child within probably, you know, I don't know, 5 blocks of me. So, and most of the concentration of families are now in the northern part of the city. That is where we have that. So having a branch library on that side of town would be wonderful for the residents in that area. I mean, that's something to consider because our city has changed and the populations have moved around. And it's not, I mean, I live near Kauai Elementary School. Either they're bused in, they're driven in, you know, because there are no kids in that area.
Yeah.
But yet the school is sitting right smack in the middle of that neighborhood. So we have to think about how our city's changing.
I agree. So maybe one of our criteria could be ideal for a central site only, if that makes sense. So if you look at a site and say, if it were smack dab in the middle of the city, that would be ideal because it could pull from all over. But it also, one other criteria could be, it would be ideal for one of several sites. So if we do go here, we would expect to be other sites in the city to serve library needs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Because I think we could grade that on these sites, I think. I'm looking at our consultants. Because talking about, I never really thought about the 360 access, whereas downtown, we would not have a 360 access because of the mountain, right? Whereas those other sites might provide that 360, and I'm trying to put that into this somehow. Does that make sense to you? I mean,
I don't know how to put this in words, but it's a little bit about sort of the message and the vision of the city. So much movement has happened in downtown. So much has actually happened in downtown. What about the rest of the city?
Yeah.
What about for all the rest of the people who still go to the swim center, who still go to farmers market? There's a whole synergy that's happening in that current site. I mean, if it was up to me, honestly, we would reduce that park to a linear park and we would put housing and we would densify that area because it needs more people, it needs more program, it needs more business. It's a prime block of the city and we're sort of leaving it to age. But that's just my own personal, observation. And that's why the synergy of having all those activities, including the movie theater, including the high school, it's almost like COD and then the vibe and everything else is pushing us to say, look at this area. There's potential here. What are we not doing? So the message from the city is to say, hey, we're at this junction right now that we have not looked at this area. We want to look at it because it represents the rest of us, not the tourists, the rest of us. So
So
sort
to
of-
look at that park and what is the vision of that block area, is that what you're saying?
Right, so what is the message? That is not the message, but where is the importance from the city in 2019? Not 2016, but 2019 of the rest of the, what I call the different type of villages that we have here in the city.
Marcus, does the city want to build a main library, or is it open, or you could find that out? Is it open to multiple sites and with more specific functions?
Well, from my perspective,
Yes, sir.
I don't know that we were talking about opening multiple branches. It's not to say that it, because you've brought it up, it makes
Yeah.
sense perhaps going in that direction. So I think if you offer it to the council, they might go,
Wow, what a concept.
I think the whole goal here was we were talking about expanding the current library. And then the idea was, well, maybe that's not the best option. Maybe it's to build new.
Okay.
So from my perspective, that's kind of what the focus was, okay, are we going to build new there? Are we going to build new with COD or this new Lot G option that came up
Or
all of a
multiple
sudden?
other new options.
Or Pavlak's trying to do what he's doing, but we also have area available at James O. Jesse,
Yep.
Desert Highland. We don't control his property, but we control our property. So that's an option if you're looking at the north end.
Well,
Not to discount what you're offering, and that's a good offer, but there's COD's involved with his property. I'll just leave it at that.
So, but I could see us as a group saying that we highly recommend option A, with the idea that this should be, we should consider multiple other service locations as part of this proposal. Doesn't mean the city council would jump on it, but we could say our observation is that we think this is a great site for a central library, but we would see the need in other areas to potentially look at expansion of the library system.
I wanted to add to that because you're getting my ideas going, and it doesn't have to be a standalone
Right.
branch building. It could be a storefront in a shopping center. You
could.
just open a little vacant store next door to
Satellite
Ralph's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be a kiosk.
Yeah, it's
They're
right.
so
So for
popular.
the, so for the
so
criteria,
great.
it really wants to, we should have a criteria that says, that evaluates the site as a site for a new main library.
Yes.
And then you should have another criteria that says, would this site be better for a satellite or adjunctive kind of building? The city closed a branch in North Palm Springs. That's in a fabulously historic and architecturally interesting building that's now a private home. Yeah. It's just like,
So we had
You're not as old as me,
Francis
Marcus.
Crocker and then Melba Bennett branch,
yeah.
north and south.
So, I think that, but that's what you need
Yeah.
is the criteria. We'll evaluate it as main or as better for a satellite or adjunctive.
And not
Well, and
not to make this really complicated, but I'm going to throw this out because we own 2 buildings right now, 3 actually, but we own 2. So there's the main library, and across the parking lot is a building that we own.
J.C. Friend.
Right, so if we were to leave the current building, there's no reason why we couldn't leave that building as some sort of service to the community. We don't have to vacate that building. So we could say that's going to be our teen center to serve the high school and COD.
Homeless center.
It could be something that we still retain. I even wager to say that we could say to the city, if we're leaving that building, we want to carve a piece of that out to keep a branch where we currently are. That could be a possibility as well. So I think that I love the criteria of us thinking about, this would be great if it's the central library and it serves all the city, or it's great for a site that would need satellite services in order for us to serve the whole city. Is that what we're saying?
Well, yeah, I think it's simple.
Yeah.
Is this site good for a main library? Is this site good for a satellite library?
Okay.
Or would this site be
Part of a system.
Right, part of the
Yeah,
system.
is it better as a satellite?
Would it
part of
require a satellite to go along with it?
Well, and that might be where the partnership with the College of the Desert came in.
It could very well be.
That could become one of your satellite libraries, and maybe not a building per se, but
True.
something that is the new library of the future that's driven more actually by a college than
It's
by
true.
a public library.
And again, sorry to keep harping on it, but unless the city wants to, take on those operational costs, they need to say what their priorities are. Left to us, we're just going to make something up that sounds good to us and that they may or may not.
And in some way, I think I kind of go with the latter. I think that if our report says, here's part of the vision of this group of citizens for this particular building and service, it is our recommendation. They don't have to take it, of course, and they may, say, go back and think of something else. But I think that thinking ahead, well, I don't see anything wrong with that, really. They've asked us for our opinion, we might as well give it to them while we have their attention.
So along that category, it also says this site serves best the full-timers and the.
Yeah, there you go.
And this site serves best, the transient population.
Having lived in a city in San Francisco where we had a board of supervisors that represented many sections of a city, we don't know yet, after the election that's about to come upon us, when we're going to have districts, where we're going to have district representatives saying, why don't I have a library? Why don't I have this? So I think that our city's going to go, and I've actually brought that up to every candidate, they're probably, if they're watching, that's a discussion, because we found that in our city. Everyone wanted something, right? We were lucky that we had that, but it could be a potential looking to the future. So I think this is a criteria that we should at least introduce. I like it.
I'd like just to go back to the question that Sue asked, and I know we don't have a lot of time. Is there anything else you need to know
No.
about these
Sorry, Sue.
sites to help you make a decision? We're going to focus on the criteria, but is there anything else you need to know?
We've talked just broadly about the outdoor space, or that we would like outdoor space of some kind, but it still seems like a wide range of possibilities of what that would be, and if is it for more kind of events and an amphitheater? Is it for cute little reading outside? Like I don't know if it's like an outdoor space like this or 4 times this. It seems really vague to me, even just the aspirations of the outdoor usage.
So the capability or the possibility of outdoor space, is that what you're asking?
What are we hoping that we're having, that
Okay.
will be included?
Okay.
So if I can clarify, so for example, would you want 25% of your space, of your lot, your site, to be for outdoor use? Are you asking that kind of a specific thing, that specific a question? Or am I forcing you into?
And I don't know if I'm thinking that specific. It's unclear to me if we just want nice outdoor, like an outdoor patio included in the library, or if it's kind of like the Salt Lake one, where there's like these gorgeous, event venue space or what. Like, it just seems like it could be such a range that it's unclear for me to visualize what we're hoping for.
And yes, that's true. And there's no way for you to decide that right now, decide what kind of outdoor space. One, you haven't had, public meetings on a program for a library. And usually that involves a lot of public discussion about what people are looking for in their library before a library is designed. Any of the sites could accommodate some kind of outdoor space if people say, I want a place I can go read outside. If possible, I want this. And so, but there's no way for you to answer that question right now.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, as we move forward with each site, having okay, in this space we have I'm imagining we're going to go through the ways, what works and what doesn't in each of the rooms or whatever, but I just want to make sure the outdoor space is part of those conversations, and I haven't noticed them too much.
Right.
So would it be, as we go through these, you've already captured the space. Could you say to us, the existing location could accommodate a mixed use of indoor, outdoor, and here's probably about how much we would have of each? Is that kind of that kind of specifics? So that we would be able to say that Lot G might give us 3 feet of outdoor space, but the current space could give us 50 feet. Is that what you're? Yeah.
These just seems like it could be anything, but it's really hard for me to imagine what the different configurations could be.
Right. And they are probably different in each location. I look at Lot G and I think rooftop garden. That's what I
But
think.
you don't live in the, you do live in the desert.
I do live in the
Rooftop
desert.
garden is no bueno. It's a very difficult thing to maintain.
That's
I
what I'm
understand that.
assuming, and that's why I'm like, I don't know the pros and
Right.
cons of what that would be.
But it could
and
be a
kinda
roof,
things like
you
that.
could have a rooftop patio. That would be, a fabulous event space for a good part of your year.
But could I piggyback on that part, also the mobility inside the building and mobility to the building? So to be in Palm Springs and to say, okay, I'm going to go read periodicals from 1980s because I missed the 80s, so I'm going to go up to the fourth floor. I don't know if that's in our culture, to go up to the fourth floor. And what I'm saying is that each of the sites probably have a different configuration or easiness of accessibility. And then the second thing I wanted to say is there a social factor? And what I mean by that is, if the library is no longer where it is, what's going to happen to the high school kids who go there for after school? What's going to happen to
Boys and Girls Club.
yeah, and sort of the, I mean, I can think of sort of the moms with the kids, maybe they will drive downtown, but maybe they'll stop going to the library. Is there a social factor by, or influenced by the location of each site that we should consider?
And I'm also thinking about the seniors who may not want to deal with traffic downtown. That might be difficult for them because they are, not driving as well as they
So
used
maybe
to.
traffic wants to be a criteria, and it's separate from parking.
Right, and we talked about how accessible is this, and that's the kind of thing I think about in terms of accessibility. But I do want to caution you to think about how long libraries exist. This library is what, 43 years old?
44 right now.
44. 44 years ago, the area around the library wasn't the same as it is right now. And 44 years from now, it's not going to be the same. Libraries stay and exist for a long time. And so you could, in Phoenix, for example, they went through a period of time where they were building libraries adjacent to shopping malls. Well, shopping malls went out of existence in many cases. They went bankrupt, and all of a sudden you had this library on a ring road around a shopping mall that nobody went to anymore. I'm just saying that what's around it can change, and so you want to take that into consideration. It might be one kind of community now, community of retirees, but you know what? Those houses are going to turn over, and you're going to have young families again. That community is going to keep changing.
So for your criteria, how about view shed? Like, general pleasantness of the exterior, of the outdoor spaces possibilities, since we're just trying to,
I also wanted to make a suggestion. If you were
shed.
if you were thinking specifically about Lot G, there's a downtown park next door that's scheduled to have an amphitheater and different outdoor space. So co-locating to that space and using some of that as our outdoor space might be an option.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was kind of going to, like, what,
Yeah.
how is outdoor usage in that facility, around that facility? How do people kind of just use that area? Thank you for that
Or you
example.
can have a rooftop garden on any of these sites.
May I suggest
You just
in
have,
your,
you just have different things to look at.
The
Yeah.
mountain.
may I suggest in your criteria, you lumped a lot of things together that I think we might want to break apart.
Okay.
So the item you have that says lot size large enough to accommodate outdoor library uses, which we talked about, but you lumped in building expansion and ample parking into that. Let's break those apart into three
Yeah.
criteria, so that we have the lot size, is it enough to accommodate an outdoor library use, a garden, a porch, a program, an amphitheater? Will it accommodate expansion for the future? And then also, is there ample parking and drive-up materials returns? You see this one right here, but you have it all lumped together. Can we break those apart? And look at those individually?
Sure. Is building expansion something you want considered?
I
Yeah, it should
would-
be a criteria.
I would, because we know what the future
Yeah,
holds.
I think we should
I really
consider it
do.
a criteria, and you see how the sites stack up.
Well, look at where we are right now. I mean, I think that we all agreed that this building expansion is probably one of the reasons we're going to consider staying where we are, right? So, and we're lucky that we do have some space. I didn't realize we had as much until you guys showed us those aerials, but would Lot G give us that kind of expansion for the future? I don't know, you know? Probably not, I mean,
No.
yeah.
Yeah,
We got
upwards.
10 stories.
Upwards.
And you have a height limitation, don't you? here
I'm sorry?
in the city?
60.
Yeah,
60,
yeah.
Yeah.
That area down there is different though, but yeah, does that kind of address some of the things that I'm hearing as well, as if we break them apart, we kind of look at them individually and kind of grade them?
Yeah.
Because they were great suggestions to begin with. Thank you.
So if there are no more, and I don't mean to truncate this because this has
'Cause we
been
need to look at
really good discussion. What we will do then is take everything that we heard, and you're going to end up with a much longer list of criteria now. And then I think it would be really helpful, Marcus, if we got that sort of city vision that we can kind of lay on top of this as well.
We'll be emailing.
And then.
We'll make it up if you don't give it to us, so.
But I'm going to come back one last time to, is there anything more you want to know about the three sites specific? I mean, in a way, you've discussed some of that tonight. You've started asking and answering your own questions. So if you think of something, please let us know, because we can go digging for you.
Agreed.
We're going to tell you a little more about some of the constraints with the current building, because you need to know that. And we'll do some more digging into Lot G. I don't know how much more digging we can do into College of the Desert at this point, but. yeah.
Well, and we'll have a little bit of time, we may have to go back and bring things forward.
Yeah.
And it may be that we share it with everyone and have time dedicated on each agenda to discuss what we learned from the last one, so.
Are we going to consider other sites?
That's the next item.
Yeah.
You were reading my mind, huh? Or the agenda.
Before that, could I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
From the school district, as far as the Palm Springs High School, has the enrollment been,
Goes up. It's been going up.
A little bit. It's still what we would consider a small school,
okay.
at about 1,600 students.
But the numbers have stayed or gone up?
Right. So overall, as a whole district, we're going down.
Okay.
But that incorporates, many communities and lots of different schools. So I could look specifically, that's something I could definitely bring back, is look specifically at the Palm Springs City Schools enrollment. I would just say our middle schools and high schools are growing a little bit, but our elementaries and early childhood programs are declining a little bit. So the long-term trend isn't as positive.
I see.
But right now, at the high school and middle school, they're growing a little bit.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Good question.
Interesting, yeah.
So let's go. I didn't. You guys did discuss with Dr. Reddy the idea, if there was another option that were to be presented to us, would we consider it? And the answer from him was?
Well, it was a site-specific. I believe you all probably heard Michael at the last meeting talk about another downtown site. And I can actually quote Dr. Eddy on this. We asked, if a fourth site, specifically this site, was going to be put on the table, what would the response to that be? Would there be any interest in it? And essentially, his answer was, we'd have to come up with another $5 million, because it's not something that's going to be given. Right now, the lots that are available are either owned by the city or, in the case of the College of the Desert, that's going to be a shared, it's our understanding that would be sort of a given to the city for a library if you decide to go in that direction. So you'd be starting out with a fairly sizable price tag for what a new option would be. And it's makes it less viable, less attractive.
And Michael actually emailed me and asked that this topic be discussed while he was here so he could state his case. And so I want to respect that for the next meeting, and we'll carry this over to the next agenda. But I'll talk, I think that, so what I'm hearing is that if we want to look at another option, if it entails more money, we got to know where that money is coming from. Now, we have a library foundation, so that could flop over to the library foundation column, correct? I mean, we could say we have to go ahead and raise that money to that side. Or we would have to, it's money is what he was saying. Right, it would be the cost. So I'll go back to Michael and talk to him so that when he comes back in, we can discuss
See, but
that.
I object, because we're being told we're supposed to do this in a vacuum, not considering program or money, and then, but some options are precluded because of programming and money. So we need to hear from on high.
Okay.
He should just say no, if it's, I mean, he really should, because it's a big waste of time to look at more sites if they really aren't going to be
Well, if
considered.
you've taken your charge to make a recommendation, there weren't any constraints put on this originally.
But there are really. In real life, there's a ton of constraints, so they should tell us what those are.
Ed, as chair, do you really feel that this process is that constrained?
I hear what you're saying. I always think that you should ask for forgiveness instead of permission.
Yeah.
So I think that if I do, I mean, I think that if we had, it is in the minutes. If we have one of our members of the community that has been appointed by city council who feels strongly that another option should be considered, I think that we should give them that opportunity to give that case. And then you're right, we could go to the city and say, we have this suggestion, and if they came back and said no, then we have our answer. But I think that we should feel free to come up with something, if any of you came up with
And that's-
something.
I don't mean constrained in that way. He wants to consider other sites. I'm all for it. The point is that we shouldn't have to necessarily do some in-depth analysis of it if it's going to get rejected out of hand. So
I
can
hear what
they?
you're saying.
But I'll also remind you that the city said they really would like,
Then David shouldn't be telling you, oh, that's another $5 million. He should just be saying, yeah, go ahead, look at whatever you want to recommend, the pie, the pie in the sky.
Forgiveness.
I believe that,
Permission.
as I recall, what he was suggesting is if you're taking these to council and you've got 3 free sites and you've got one site that's going to cost
Okay.
$5 million,
Well, that's different. Okay.
council won't necessarily go to the one that costs $5 million.
Well, yeah, and that's obvious, right?
So maybe one of the criteria is, does the city control the property?
that's
Because, I mean, COD
Yeah.
is still an issue because we don't yet know the
Very
details
good.
on
That's
that.
why we
Thank
invited
you.
you. Good
And
idea.
I don't know if you want to include a north site, whether it's, well, still, I think that we're talking about a main branch, we're not talking about a satellite. So, there is still a lot of area available at James O. Jesse Desert Highland Community Center. I mean, there's still,
Is that city property?
yes. This whole, I don't know if you can see it,
It's the
Yeah,
old
there's a lot
but
of
COD
vacant
site.
area is still not developed, so.
and where is that? I'm sorry, Marcus, I didn't hear you say.
I'll give you an exhibit.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So could
I'd
I,
like to understand that we're,
I
to
don't know if you
understand then
want
that we're
to
supposed
entertain
to-
a fourth site on the north end.
I'm amenable to it. Michael feels very strongly about it. I think that the recommendation that this group ends up rendering is more powerful if you looked at more than just 3 prescribed sites.
I can't speak for Michael. Michael, forgive me because I know you're watching, because you said you were going to watch. So we're going to discuss this next time. But I have a feeling that Michael might have thought, could we swap Lot G for Lot F? Maybe he wasn't thinking of being cost associated with this, it being that it would not cost the city anything to go to that or negotiate that. But let's let Michael come, and he's on the planning commission, and I think he could speak from much more information. So we'll talk to you next time we meet, Michael. So, but I think that, until we make the final decision, something could come up, right? So
along that line, could I also suggest, because we have a very tight schedule, that if by the time you have the meeting date where COD site is being looked at in detail. And at that time, we don't have as much as details as the other two site. I think it would be responsible to drop that.
That actually is what I have shared to the city. Here's what I have communicated back to city council and said, here's the results of our meeting. And it's now back in your hands to tell us what you want us to do next. So I think there's some on vacation right now. So I think their intention is to have those discussions to clarify that for us when we're ready. It's last on our list. So yes.
I have one more criteria.
Yeah.
Is this site the highest, as a library, the highest and best use for this proposed site?
I'm sorry, say it again.
You could evaluate each site to determine if a library is its highest and best use.
I think that's been decided on these sites though, right? Or we wouldn't have them. I don't know.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily?
I think it's interesting criteria.
But I think I could tell you that depending on how the library is designed, the type of library you build, all of these sites work. They work differently,
Okay.
but they all work.
But if you look at, you could grade sites in terms of whether a library is the highest and best use at that
see what you're
site
saying.
for our community. That's how you get a stratification of priority.
Yeah, in our community, that could be a specific, I can see, I see what you're coming from. Would the lot G really serve better as an extension of the park versus a library is what
Yeah.
you're saying, right?
Or if you were going to build, if you had the whole city right now, would you build your library where the current one is? Maybe so. It's centrally located.
It is
And it's
central.
quite similar to the COD site in those two criteria, and G is very different, and the baby pit is the same as G. And the North Palm Springs.
We call it the baby
Yeah.
pit. I'll tell you what.
It's a lot of, and the, sorry, it's late. And a North Palm Springs site is completely, has its own, will get its own grades. That might be persuasive.
I think that that's what you're defining with the criteria. By assessing all of these sites based on the criteria, you're saying, which site is best used as a library for Palm Springs? I think that's what you're doing
Yeah.
with the criteria.
No, but I'm asking the reverse of it. Is the site, you understand what I'm saying? That is this site supposed to be a library?
I think any site can be a library.
No, because you can look at a piece of land and you can say, this really wants, its highest and best use is residential for a variety of reasons. And the other thing I'd like to see is the Riverside County demographics. We're the fastest growing, I believe we're the fastest growing county in California, or at least have been over the last few years. So what does that influx look like, and what will the population be, and will Palm Springs be affected by it?
Well, I just thought of an idea is in the North End next to James O. Jesse. I mean, how wonderful would it be to have a swim center there? That the kids, they have a summer program there and the kids are bused over to the swim center, maybe a pool, maybe not a swim center, but maybe a swimming pool for the kids that are in the north end of Palm Springs. I don't know. The other options, I'm sure, are out there, but yeah, you're right. We could look at the site and say, wow, this would be better used this way.
I think that if I may, just one last thing, that depending on who you ask that question of, for example, if I were on the Parks Board and I looked at the current library site, I might say, this needs to be a community center. This is a community center where we have a pool and we have a gym and we have places people can take classes. But you might look at it and say, this is a library site. I think that's I think that's a difficult one for to come up with a specific answer for. It's not.
Well,
I
but
think it's very
everybody's gonna-
objective.
Well, everybody's going to grade it. I mean, developers do it all the time. They say, this wants to be commercial, this wants to be residential, this wants to, they do it because they figure out that it maximizes the land use.
Could I jump in on so in my mind, there's like 3-4 different scenarios that are how we're going to judge it individually on the 3 different sites. Is it such that we have the category pretend for a moment we score it from 1 to 10, you know? And then at the end, we have a score, and my score is this on this side, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so at the end of the day, is it the average score on the site, or is it that we're gonna discuss it out, and we're gonna take a vote, and those who are in the minority are gonna lose on the site, and those who are in the majority is gonna win the site? So in other words, is it an accounting scoring, or is it a discussion scoring?
So glad you asked that question.
Okay.
So, one of the reasons that we did this sort of template, so you could sort of check off on the criteria, and we're going to revise the criteria, is in a perfect world, one of these would be very, very, very heavy, would have met 80% of the criteria, which would be a way of saying, well, this looks like this really leans toward being the best site. But absolutely, we did that so that when you go back to the city council, you could say, this wasn't just a, I love Lot G.
Right.
This isn't a beauty contest. We really wanted some objectivity in it so that you could go back and say, we looked at this based on criteria that's national criteria, but our criteria that we developed ourselves. And I think you're going to find, and I couldn't tell you which way at this point, that one of the 3 sites is probably going to dominate. But then you have to have all the rich conversation that goes around still making a case for that site. Then you're going to have to bring in the piece that connects it to the city's vision and that connects it to all of those less tangible things. So it is not going to be an accounting process, but it's meant to be a process that does lend itself to some objectivity. So that's why we talked about deliberation. It's not just going to be hand in your papers and,
We'll see who
Lot
wins.
G wins by 5 votes. No. But
And-
thank you.
In honor of time, so may I ask the consultants to gather the notes for the criteria that we've discussed? Since we have a 2-week before we meet again, let's send those out to everyone and give everyone a chance to review, absorb, and give feedback very quickly on, did we overlook something or do you have something new? We'll put on the agenda at our next meeting, we will finalize the criteria after that. So we give ourselves some time, plus the people who aren't here, to kind of think about it. But just all be prepared that we're going to come in, and one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to finalize the criteria for the Palm Springs Public Library. Do I have a, you're looking at me like, if I've lost my mind or am I okay?
I'll second that.
Yeah, okay.
And we'll get those back to you probably very early next week.
Okay.
So we'll turn
Okay.
it around quickly.
All right. I think this is a great discussion. I think that we're on our way. So thank you for facilitating that. That's why you're here.
Well, and I think what the important shift that I saw is you now own this process. Ed doesn't own it anymore. The consultants certainly don't,
Thank
but
God.
I think you really have, gotten your fingers into it now and are really starting to shape this process, so.
We have a little bit, I forgot.
Send it to us by email.
The Henry Weiss book that was written, Jeannie has digitized that for us, and it's on a site. She's also created a Google Docs or Dropbox. Dropbox. Does everyone know how to use Dropbox? If she were to give access to it, we could put the documents there. Is that okay? I meant to ask that at the very beginning, but instead of us creating things, we'll just put things in that Dropbox and give all of you access to it, if that's okay. And that's where you digitized.
Emailing large files for me is
It's
out
hard.
of the question.
And
I
you've
can't do it.
digitized the Henry Weiss
Yes.
Sunrise book there, right? So we
Yes.
could go to that and look at that, so,
And it's keywords searchable.
wonderful. Do we have any other old business from the last meeting? I wanted to make sure, did we cover everything from the last meeting? All right, so our next meeting is September the 9th, 2019 at 5:30 in this room. And thank you guys all for being here. Well, have a great holiday.
Thank you.
I'm giving you next Monday off, okay? All right.